This is the job I do most and the one that brings me the most profit. For this type of work, I usually use sawhorses, but before starting, there's something fundamental: making sure they're perfectly level with each other. That's what gives precision to the entire assembly of the door. To make this model, I use folded sheet metal. And if you don't know how to order this type of sheet metal, I'll link a video up here where I explain exactly how to order it to make this door design. As I mentioned before, I'm going to work with 80 by 40 mm structural tubing, 2 mm thick. The first thing is to accurately mark the cut locations. In this kind of work, it's always best to measure twice before cutting. That way, we avoid mistakes that could lead to wasted material or cuts that aren't square. Once the lines is marked, I check that the cut-off wheel lines up exactly with the mark to ensure a clean and precise cut. When I do precision work, I have a problem. My cut-off saw doesn't cut perfectly at 45 degrees because the wheel tends to bend. So what I do is cut at 90 degrees first and then finish the 45-degree angle with the grinder. That way, I get a much more precise cut. If you don't know how to cut perfect 45-degree angles with a grinder, I'll also leave a video up here where I explain how to do it. There's something very important here. The inner part of the 45-degree cut has to be exactly the same size as the sheet metal that goes inside the door. Once I have all the tubes cut, I lay them out in place to start assembling. Many people ask me why I assemble the frame directly together with the sheet metal. The reason is simple. The sheet metal already comes cut and folded perfectly square. So if I were to assemble the frame first and make a mistake, even by a millimeter, then the sheet metal might end up with a gap. On the other hand, by assembling the frame directly on top of the sheet metal, I make sure it turns out perfect. Still, even though sheets from the metal shop usually come squared up, I always check before I start. Once everything is checked, I start tightening the clamps and get the frame ready for welding. In appearance-focused work like this door, where the welds are visible, I try to make everything as neat as possible. That's why I mark every spot where I'm going to make the tacks or small weld beads. This doesn't affect the strength of the work. Welding anywhere will be just as strong. But it does change the final appearance a lot. And that adds a lot in a job like this. Once everything is marked, I start to tack weld the frame, and since the sheet metal is perfectly square, there's no need to measure the diagonals or keep measuring all the time. The same sheet metal already serves as a guide for the Now it's time to turn the door over. And that's why I first grind down the tack welds, so they don't get in the way when I rest it on the sawhorses. This door is a rather unique request because it's a tall but narrow door. Even though it's small, it takes pretty much the same amount of work as a large door. While I finish welding, I'm also grinding everything down to make it neat. already bent the outer frame on both sides as well. And to give it the correct spacing, I use some nails that are about 2 millimeters thick. That creates the small gap needed so that the door doesn't rub against the frame when it opens or closes. Once I've confirmed everything is straight, I can install the hinges. As you can see, I only used 2 hinges on this door. There are projects where 3 are used. But since this door isn't too heavy, 2 are more than enough. If you want, I can make a video later explaining when it's better to use 2 hinges and when to use 3. On the other side, I use these 6 millimeter screws that help me leave the exact space where the lock will go. And at the bottom, I weld this rod to prevent the frame from opening at the bottom. Then I mark the height where the lock will go and get ready to make the cut. To install it, I make 2 holes and then finish the cut with the grinder. That way the lock fits perfectly. And that's how the door turned out. Very stylish, neat, and ready for delivery. Now it just needs to be painted, and the job is done.